I think first thing to say is that today's march has been magnificent, and I think the determination of Derby as well is something that should be applauded. I think the message has been loud and clear that Cameron and his mates must not be allowed to get away with this jobs massacre at Bombardier. And I think I will come on, Peter, to some of the ideas I think of where we go next and what the union does next. I think it's an incredibly important meeting. They've had their big march today. What do they do next? I just want to pick up on something that Chris Williamson said as well about when he was speaking. I think he was quite eloquent in terms of his description of public services and investment in public services and transport in particular. And I thought he was about to say the dreaded N-word, nationalisation. But he didn't, did it? But that is obviously an option that is available to the government to actually pursue here, nationalisation. Now, let's not forget as well that there was an industry that they told us that had to be saved or there would be complete meltdown, and that was the banks. They didn't hesitate then, did they, in nationalising them? And surely we should be arguing that transport is as important, if not more so, than banks, and they should be nationalised as well. I think, based on my time in the buses as well, just to give you some idea about political will, Chris spoke about political will. In London, 18 private bus companies run the buses in there, in London, and they're subsidised by the government to the tune of £1 billion. Now, it is taxpayers' money. Now, this isn't something I wouldn't argue against by any means, but it shows that there's political will in this country to fund public transport out of the public purse. And I think, again, that's an argument that needs to be brought into play in Derby's situation, that if we do want a decent transport system in this country that's green as well, then there's already examples of that underway. And just on the British jobs for British workers issue, I mean, I think it's really important that slogan does not really gain any pace or any traction, because it will feed a certain view of life, and I think it's important that we come up with a different slogan. And I think one of the things that seems to be generated in this meeting is around greens, and I think the green jobs for green workers in Derby, that should be perhaps a slogan that could counter any particular notion of that this is a kind of fight just for British workers, which it shouldn't be the case. And Bob Cryer actually mentioned something really interesting in his speech, and I completely agree with him from a Right to Work campaign's perspective, that there is more than enough work to go around, whether it's in Britain, France or Germany. It's just that isn't necessarily the wealth is shared enough equally amongst these people, so in order to provide jobs for everybody. And I think that's again an argument that broadens out this debate. But I just want to inject into this idea of what the trade union campaign in Derby does next. It seems to me that the strategy is quite clear, that it's to try and force a U-turn by the government. And that seems to be pretty much it. And some hope and some notion around how that's achieved. I mean, the march is obviously a move towards that today. I mean, we need to start talking about strike action, it seems to me, as a means of taking the government on. That needs to really start being debated strongly. Previous speakers spoke about occupations. I mean, occupations, traditionally for decades have always been a means by which workers have been able to show their strength and fight back. And I think it's particularly interesting that Suzanne mentioned the Vesta struggle on the Isle of Wight, which has some resonance with in terms of green jobs. But I also remember the Vistian dispute in Enfield. I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but the bosses sacked 600 workers at 6 minutes' notice in 2009 at the Vistian, and they had a choice. They could either fight or fly, and they chose to fight, and they occupied their plant. And workers in Belfast plant launched a defiant occupation of their factory, and they were joined by workers at Enfield and Basildon plants who also occupied. At the time, they were given no notice, no redundancy pay. There was no consultation over this. There was no right to transfer, and all had their pensions frozen at that time. After they occupied the plant, they collected an average of £35,000. Now that is, if ever there was an example of actually workers fighting back and showing their strength, I think that's it. I mean, it was clearly a victory, and I think the crisis, whether it's financial or climate, provides us with a real opportunity to fight back. And I think it's something that the people of Derby and the workforce of Derby think we need to start debating. They will, of course, be the ones that ultimately decide what to do. But I also think it's time to have this plan B in place as well, that if the government don't make the U-turn, we can't just give up. There needs to be some radical action that kicks into place that tries to make the difference. I'm just going to finish on emphasising again, as Suzanne did, an incredibly important march, I would suggest people of Derby, but certainly people of this country, outside the Tory Party conference in Manchester. The Right to Work campaign initiated this conference for this demonstration, and we've also initiated one. Not the conference, no. We initiated one outside the Mid-Den conference as well in Birmingham on the 18th of September, and we've been working regionally with the TUCs in order to sort of make these wider, and hopefully this week you may hear that the National TUC also comes on board, and it may well be a follow-on to the March for the Alternatives that we saw in London, where 500,000 people turned up, and that hopefully will be where we're heading. And if that happens, that is a significant development, I would suggest, in the fight back, not only against the government, but against the cuts agenda generally, and it sends a real strong message out to everybody that we're all in this together against them. Thank you.